This podcast may contain explicit language.
Farquaad.
I'm just waiting for you to fuck that up and just go fuckwad one of these times.
All right, from the beginning. Shrek, Mike Myers, is a green ogre who loves the solitude of his swamp. However, his life is interrupted after the dwarfish Lord Farquaad. Lord Farquaad,
You did it
John
again.
Lithgow.
There's one R in far quad.
Can't stop laughing now. John Lithgow. Farquaad. Okay. All right.
Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
Tonight we apply our patent-pending Stanley rubric to our second animated feature of the show, Shrek, starring Mike Myers, Cameron Diaz, Eddie Murphy, and John Lithgow. However, quickly before we get to the show, next week, in anticipation of the new movie coming next month, we are covering the original The Matrix, starring Keanu Reeves, Carrie-Anne Moss, and Lawrence Fishburne. You won't want to miss that one, so please watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Also, you can still sign up for our weekly newsletter, either by the website in the show notes, you can subscribe at the bottom of every page, or you can email us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Additionally, did you know that our website has the full notes for every episode of the show, as well as the master list of movies we've graded so far? There are links in the episode descriptions of every episode to direct you right there. Check them out. And, as always, please like, follow, rate, and review the show on whichever podcast platform you use. We would really appreciate it. So, Dad, Shrek. I do remember seeing this one in theaters with you and the rest of the family. This was also the first DVD we ever bought as a family. What were your memories of this as we were watching this for the episode this week?
Well, taking everybody to the theater to watch it, knowing very little about what was going on with it, and trying to pick out the voice actors, immediately recognizing, obviously, Mike Myers and Eddie Murphy, and then realizing John Lithgow was also in the movie.
That's it? Just the voice actors?
Yeah, that's about it. I mean, it was one of those where it was kind of like passing the popcorn back and forth and trying to keep you guys from like poking each other and going, he's touching me.
I want to say this was like a May or June release, and I would have been, I think, either 10 or 11. So that would have made Allison 7 or 8, and Sarah like 4, maybe 5. So yeah, okay, I guess I can get it. But I do remember fondly that watching this in the theater, I thought all of us were rolling. Like, I thought it was pretty apparent that this was a good movie. You know, kind of when you sit in something and you're just like, oh, okay. And it really had my attention just about from the jump. When you do that whole fairy storybook thing at the beginning and he rips the page out and okay, yeah, we're playing around with this a little bit. We're kind of coming right at Disney and the fairy tale stuff that they've been going after for a long time and trying to uproot it and take them on directly. Okay, this is a little bit different. Oh, Eddie Murphy's pretty funny. And I think this was such a craze at the time. I remember distinctly sleepovers, this being shown at like lockouts, which were like those 24-hour things where you'd get locked in a building and you'd have some adult supervision, but you'd be around. But this was a universally loved film by a lot of people, and it wasn't necessarily just for kids. I kind of liken it that it had kind of that style of Looney Tunes humor that had a lot of stuff that was for kids that was easy, like the physical humor or fart jokes, because there are a ton of those in here. But there's also a lot of adult humor just kind of layered in there.
It was, and I do remember, and what year was this?
2001.
2001. So that would have been. Would that have been
Carlos, but I think he was gone
Aggie?
already. I think
Who?
that was right before
Carlos?
Augie would have come.
Okay.
Sorry, our former exchange student. For the listening audience that isn't up on every member of the Duncan family.
There are 18 of them. That would be a lot to remember.
We're not Mormon, Catholic, or Italian. We just take in strays.
Yes.
And I think it was significant that this was the first DVD that we actually bought, because I remember the DVD player and this specifically being the first purchase that we got, because all of us liked it. It was a good movie. We thought, okay, this is one we're all going to watch multiple times. This was worth the investment as opposed to just getting something like Pearl Harbor that year.
Well, considering that Pearl Harbor was a mediocre film.
Oh, come now. We had such stars as Ben Affleck and Josh Hartnett.
Yes. And I remember somebody who watched that film who had a problem with it for several weeks afterwards.
Okay, I was 11. You wanted me to be okay with all of the war violence?
Okay.
That's like showing me Saving Private Ryan before I was like 15.
Well, yeah, because you were studying World War II, and I said, you need to see what D-Day really
It's a
was.
comprehension thing. You have to be of an appropriate time and age in order to actually. It's one thing to just see it, it's another thing to understand what it means. Otherwise, it's just shock value.
Okay.
Like when you get into the level of abstract thought, I can tell you, even you were not capable of true abstract thought at 11. Probably 12, but not 11.
Well, I would argue with you because I personally do not believe abstract thought actually exists.
Oh, then we'd have a very long debate on that one.
I think abstract thought is just the analytical extension of your own guttural feelings.
Okay. I have no idea what you mean by that at all, but it's not worth exploring.
Well, it's when you think of something abstract, like somebody dies in a plane crash, you equate it to how you would feel if it was somebody that you knew or loved dying. That's why it's not abstract. You have to equate it to some sort of emotion or feeling that you understand. And that's why some things that are unique or that you lack.
Abstract terms that require abstract thought and philosophy have nothing to do with the emotional tenements that you're talking about. What would you say in the concept of freedom is not abstract thought?
Because when you talk about freedom, you feel or think about situations where you would feel oppressed.
I don't buy that at all.
I understand, but that's my thought. I'm sticking with it. I'm almost 58, and that's what I've come up with, that everybody ultimately doesn't understand an abstract concept until they're able to tie something emotional to it, which makes it tangible.
I don't buy that at all because your profession revolves around abstract thought that has no application in the real. You go through hypotheticals on a constant.
Yes, but the hypotheticals are based on reality.
Half the time, hypotheticals are coming up and combining different things that really have no existence or, what is it, precursor?
So, to avoid our audience tuning out now because of our abstract thought here, enough. Let's move on.
Okay, anyway, you got your plot summary for us?
I do. Shrek, Mike Myers, is a green ogre who loves the solitude of his swamp. However, his life is interrupted after the dwarfish Lord Farquaad, John Lithgow, exiles a vast number of fairytale creatures to Shrek's swamp. Angered by the intrusion, he decides to visit Farquaad and demand that he move them elsewhere. He reluctantly allows the talkative donkey, Eddie Murphy, who was exiled as well, to tag along and guide him. Meanwhile, Farquaad learns that for him to become a true king, he must marry a princess. Farquaad chooses the beautiful Princess Fiona, Cameron Diaz, who is imprisoned in a castle tower guarded by a dragon. Unwilling to perform the task himself, he organizes a tournament in which the winner will receive the privilege of rescuing Fiona. Shrek and Donkey arrive during the tournament and defeat Farquaad's knights, to which Farquaad then proclaims them champions and demands that they rescue Fiona. Shrek negotiates to have the fairy tale creatures relocated if he succeeds, and Farquaad accepts. But in this fairy tale, the happily ever after is not what either of them suspects.
Thank you. Mike Myers as Shrek, Eddie Murphy as Donkey, Cameron Diaz as Princess Fiona, John Lithgow as Lord Farquaad. Oops, Freudian slip there. Farquaad, Vincent Cassell as Monsieur Hood, and Chris Miller as the Magic Mirror. Recognition for this movie. The film was theatrically released in the United States on May 18th, 2001 and grossed $484 million worldwide against a production budget of $60 million, becoming the fourth highest grossing film of 2001. Shrek won the first ever Academy Award for Best Animated Feature and was also nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. In June 2008, the American Film Institute revealed its 10 Top 10, the best 10 films in 10 classic American film genres, after polling over 1,500 people from the creative community. Shrek was acknowledged as the eighth best film in the animated genre, and the only non Disney Pixar film in the top 10. Shrek was also ranked second in a Channel 4 poll of the 100 greatest family films, losing out on the top spot to E.T. the Extraterrestrial. In 2005, Shrek came sixth in Channel 4's 100 Greatest Cartoons poll, behind The Simpsons, Tom and Jerry, South Park, Toy Story, and Family Guy. In November 2009, the character, Lord Farquaad, was listed number 14 in IGN UK's top 15 fantasy villains. In 2006, it was ranked third on Bravo's 100 Funniest Films list. In May 2010, the film's title character was awarded his own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Did you know? Steven Spielberg was originally going to produce the film in 1991 when he was in charge of Amblin Entertainment. Then, the film would have been in hand-drawn animation and was going to star Bill Murray as Shrek and Steve Martin as Donkey. Boy, that would have been a different film.
Yeah.
Did you know? Chris Farley was originally cast as Shrek and even recorded almost all of the dialogue. However, after his death, the role was given to fellow Saturday Night Live performer Mike Myers. Shrek's air quotes in the film is an homage to Farley, whose character Bennett Brower also used air quotes. A story reel featuring a sample of Farley's recorded dialogue was leaked to the public in August 2015. Did you know? Janine Garofalo was originally set to voice Princess Fiona, but was summarily fired without explanation after the death of Chris Farley. To this day, Garofalo has no idea why she was let go. Did you know? Mike Myers originally voiced Shrek with his natural speaking voice before the film was screen tested. Then he tried country Canadian accents for Shrek. However, after viewing a rough cut of the film, he felt that there was something missing from his performance, and re-recorded all of his lines with a Scottish accent based on the voice his mother used when reading him bedtime stories as a child. The original voice can still be heard in the technical goofs of the DVD. The decision to re-voice Shrek in a Scottish accent ended up costing an additional $4 million, as it took him 20 sessions to complete the re-voiceover. It can also be stated that Shrek's accent is similar to the one Mike Myers uses for his character Fat Bastard in the Austin Powers series. This was his first voice performance in an animated film. Did you know? Mike Myers was in New York City when they realized that the line, "What are you doing in my swamp?" had never been read. So producer Jeffrey Katzenberg flew to New York City and had Myers read the line in the back of a limo. Did you know? The principal actors never met each other. They all read their parts separately, with a reader feeding them the lines. John Lithgow later admitted that, while he enjoyed playing Lord Farquaad, he was a little disappointed that he never actually worked directly with Mike Myers, Cameron Diaz, or Eddie Murphy. Did you know? Alan Rickman was the initial casting choice for the role of Lord Farquaad. However, Rickman opted to portray the role of Professor Severus Snape in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone instead. The role ultimately went to John Lithgow. Did you know? Robin Williams was going to have a role in the film, but he suffered a bitter falling out with Jeffrey Katzenberg when Katzenberg was still working at Disney and refused to work with him. Did you know? The song All Star by Smash Mouth, heard in the opening credits, was only a placeholder for test screenings until a new song could be found. But test audiences loved it, and the producers kept it in. When the producers decided to keep All Star, they decided to let the band perform the last song in the movie, I'm a Believer. Did you know? Shrek means monster in Yiddish and is derived from the German word Schreck, Schreck, which means terror or fright. Let's take a quick break before we get to the rest of the categories. We'll be right back. Thank you for rejoining us. All right, Dad, what would be the elevator pitch for this movie?
Prince Charming with ogres.
I went with it's a cross between She's Out of My League with Mother Goose.
Okay.
Well, I mean that's basically the concept is somebody that doesn't feel they're good enough, that if the world completely rejects over and over again, finding that he can be valuable to at least one person, and that's enough to fight for. But with a bunch of fairy tale creatures mixed in, like the wolf in Red Riding Hood being in the bed, and the three little pigs, or the three, what is it? The I can't even think of what the bears are. There's Mama Bear, Papa Bear, and what is it? Little Bear? I don't remember.
Baby bear.
Baby Bear. My bad. So best performance for you.
Mike Myers.
That was mine as well.
Clearly, his portrayal, the voice inflections, the aspects of it, he just did a really good job. And I understand how difficult it is to do an entire film voicing with a false accent. So I just thought he had an innocence about himself that came through in the voice that made Shrek more lovable.
And that's the characteristic that I really wanted to hone in on. Not only do you have to be likable and funny, you have to be crass while being endearing. And that's a really tough charge, or at least a very fine line to navigate. From what I got from his character, you never got the sense that he was too much of an ogre to not be normal. He felt more normal than Lord Farquaad, who kind of acted like that rich entitled prick that everybody hates. And I think that's kind of the point is that the average Joe, in this case seen as the ogre, ends up being the more likable, endearing character because he's just true to himself the whole time. And I think that's a very difficult thing to pull off with voice work, no less, because that is what breathes into the character. Yes, there's an animation portion of this that you could highlight definitely that brings life to the character, but it does have a soul by what the voice is that's breathed into it.
Well, and quite frankly, thinking about Chris Farley, I think Chris Farley had that aspect naturally where he had a vulnerability, an innocence, but a crassness. And, he was just a little over the top on everything. So I can see him in this part. So what I would, I didn't do it, but I think I might now is to try to do an internet research and see if I can find the movie with his voiceover if it's out somewhere on the internet.
Well, I'm sure it is somewhere. I mean, if it came out like 6 years ago, I'm sure there's probably like 7, 8 different YouTube postings with that in there. Best secondary, then, I had Eddie Murphy. Yes, he has to be just the funny guy in this. He's the punchline guy and he can riff all the time. But he is to this movie what Robin Williams was to Aladdin. He added a certain level of humor that lightened up the movie, but also gave it its emotional climax. He's the character that has to get inside the main character's head and make him be the change. Donkey plays a very important role to the entire movie in how he has to interact with Shrek. And he becomes the wisecracking sidekick, but also the entrance point for the audience. And that's a difficult thing, again, to pull off as a voice actor.
I agree totally. This character allowed Eddie Murphy to really kind of create and be more freeform because, a donkey. I mean, what role is a donkey necessarily going to have in a film or even in an animated? So it basically allowed him broad access to do what he wanted and to be creative and funny and ad lib. And my guess is that a lot of the stuff that ended up in the movie was stuff that he just created off the cuff.
Well, I know there are at least a few lines specifically that he did, or that there were a few things. I mean, Mike Myers had a couple of those himself that they added in and tried to animate over, but really, I would imagine Murphy probably did that more than anybody else due to his time on SNL. Although, now that I say that, Mike Myers was a celebrated cast member for years as well. So it's tough to say. But again, I'd like to specifically focus on because he becomes the exact thing that is kind of the understated nature. It's a talking donkey, but in other words, he's the talking ass.
Yes.
He's the wisecracking joke maker that undermines everything and yet is lovable because he's just got this exuberance to him and a certain level of optimism that is easily housed within the audience and I think is the most relatable, despite some of his crassness at times, to the rest of the audience. I think Shrek is more of an adult character, but Donkey is relatable more to children.
Yes.
So, most charismatic then.
I went outside the box as I tend to do. I went with Jeffrey Katzenberg. Katzenberg had left Disney at this point in time, and in large part because he was passed over for head of Disney. It was Katzenberg, David Geffen, and Steven Spielberg that formed the studio. SKG, I believe, was the name of the studio. Actually, that
No, it's DreamWorks.
but if you look,
Yes, it
it's
has that the initials
at the
after it, but the
beginning,
studio
and then it's
is DreamWorks.
DreamWorks. All right, and I was going to state that, but anyway, I mean, he was the creative force behind Beauty and the Beast. He was the creative force behind Aladdin, The Lion King, and then he left, and then his first major project with DreamWorks was this. He
No, it
just
wasn't.
had, what was it?
Ants from
Ants?
'98.
Okay, my mistake.
Yeah, they started the studio about '98 because Spielberg also did Saving Private Ryan under the DreamWorks label.
Okay. Well, I just thought, I guess he was not the most pleasant person to work with or under, but he had a vision and was able to convey it with an animation, I think, better probably than anybody has done other than Walt Disney.
So if you remember the Disney animated movies that we constantly looked forward to in the '90s when we were all kids and they would come out around Allison's birthday every year, he had somewhat of a direct hand in, or some of his underlings. And the minute they all left to go take on other projects, Disney had Pixar, and that was about it for their animation department for a long time. And it kind of was unusual that the Disney animated department suffered such a hole that they really didn't dig out of until much, much later. I think the first Disney animated feature that they did after a while, because they basically ceded all of that territory to Pixar for at least a good decade, was Tangled, if I remember correctly. But now they've done things like, I know that Frozen was under the Disney banner as opposed to the Pixar banner. There are a couple of them that they have put out, but still the primary driver is Pixar for their animation department. But the fact that his leaving ended up causing such a hole for a decade worth of movies from the studio that had brought you literally animated movies going back to what, the 50s, the 60s? I mean, Steamboat Willie's in the 30s, and Fantasia, I think, is in the 30s as well, or maybe the early 40s. But
Bambi was 1940.
yeah, okay. I think Snow White might have been 39. if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So, but that far back, and then to just have this gap where you've ceded all control to the computer generation department as opposed to the hand drawn, I think is a little bit significant of what he was as a figure in that studio. For most charismatic for me though, it's Mike Myers. Again, you have to love an ogre. He's crass throughout the entire movie. I can remember distinctly the first time seeing it when he pulls the wax out of his ears and lights it on fire as the candle, and mom just like absolutely reviling at that moment. You and he does that. He makes fart jokes. There's a certain level of just absolutely uncouth behavior constantly out of him, and yet you love him. And that's a hard trick to do. I think that is the definition of charismatic.
Well, that's what kind of about the time that I started telling your mother that the grossest thing on the face of the earth is an 11-year-old boy, because he doesn't quite need to rein himself in to try to attract girls, but he's just close enough to an adult that he can be just disgusting. He can smell bad. He can laugh at stuff. And your mother disagreed. And that's when I remember at the dinner table, I just looked over and said, all I have to do is say one word and he'll bust out laughing. And she said, no way. I said, I'll bet you a back rub. And then I reached over, looked at you and went, boobies. And you laughed for about 3 minutes. And I said,
Well,
I
it wasn't
rest.
just that you said the word, it was how you did it.
By the way, the only thing close to an 11-year-old boy is an 11-year-old girl.
Okay. I can't say I really noticed at the time. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Let's move on to best scene then. I had down a few of them. I think I have 9. Donkey meets Shrek. Basically, the opening where Donkey runs away and the donkey fly and all that other stuff. But the torture of the gingerbread man. Have to have that one on there. Welcome to Doolot. Royal Rumble, which is Shrek taking on all of the knights. Ogres are like onions. Shrek rescues Fiona. Monsieur Hood, Fiona's curse, and the wedding. Any scenes that I missed?
The magic mirror?
Isn't that at the back end of the gingerbread man though? I mean,
Uh,
at least the first appearance. There's the second one where he's basically watching the magic mirror on like replay from his bed, and it gets really creepy.
well, yeah. I don't know. There are times where Lord Farquaad should probably be on the sex offender registration list.
All right, so out of those, what's the best scene?
I personally like the whole wedding scene. I think it's the payoff. Although I like the initial kiss scene too, where she thinks she's going to kiss him and he'll turn into a prince and she'll be a princess, and really they're both ogres. I think that's really the quintessential point of this, is that you don't have to be a prince. There are people who are able to be ogres and find another ogre and be happy.
I would probably go with Shrek rescuing Fiona. There's a lot going on in that scene, and it's got to have the payoff. That's probably the most action heavy scene of the entire movie, and it's the pivot point between the two sides of the movie. There's all of the preamble that gets you up to that point, and then all of the post action, which is actually with Fiona and kind of the love story playing out, that sort of thing. So it kind of divides the movie, and yet it has to reward you with that payoff that there's got to be the dragon. They have to get in some sort of chase. It's got to be somewhat funny, but be entertaining and thrilling. I think you have to not only write that well, but it also has to look good. And I think for the most part, it actually holds up pretty well.
Yeah.
Favorite scene for me though is the torture of the gingerbread man. I have repeated that scene verbatim. I don't know how many times. I think I did it in the office this week, and everybody knew what I was talking about. It is universally one of those that I could probably walk into most bars right now, even college bars, and start just riffing lines from that scene, everybody would know. Not the gumdrop buttons.
That's my most indelible moment because that's the scene that I always remember from Shrek.
I almost went there, but I don't know. It was tough to nail down because there are so many moments that I think through and they start replaying in my mind as to what is the most important or biggest thing from this movie. What was your favorite scene though before we get to my most indelible?
The actual most or the same as my indelible because that opening scene or the scene with the gingerbread man just set me off to begin with and just kind of set the mood for the entire film.
Well, it's not only creates the villain in the way that you need because it's the first appearance of Farquaad, but it also creates that this guy's going to be ruthless and cruel, but it's going to be funny in the way that he does it. It's not just going to be that this guy's stupid or a doofus, kind of like what Princess Bride's villain ended up being, but this guy's going to be ruthless and he's going to just be cruel for no reason and be able to lord it over you because he's got a Napoleon complex.
Yeah.
For me, the most indelible though is it's a line and a moment. In the morning, I'm making waffles.
Okay.
I don't know why that stuck out to me forever. There's a line from the DVD play menu I could have gone with that we used to repeat as kids forever. Play the movie. Yeah, play the movie. Which is just the three little pigs on that weird little riff, but I've repeated that forever. There are just so many little things that come from this movie, but that's the one if I had to pick that I seem to remember the most because I think I've reused that line the most. All right, let's take another quick break though before we get to the rubric. We'll be right back. Thank you for rejoining us. Dad, before we get to the rubric, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes, unfortunately, we do. Dean Stockwell, 85, who's an American actor. For those of my generation, probably remember him on a large part of a TV show, Quantum Leap. He did several films, Married to the Mob, Blue Velvet, which David Lynch film with uh,
Dennis Hopper and Kyle MacLachlan. We were just discussing this afternoon, Dad.
yes, and Isabella Rossellini. He's in that as well, and that's where I kind of realized who he was and have seen him on several films. But he was a long time. He was started out as a child actor and was able to make the transition to an adult actor. And he had a very long career. If you're not familiar with him, look up his IMDb page. You'll immediately recognize because he'll be, oh, that guy. And he, longtime character actor, very good. Sorry to see him pass at 85, but he had a very good career and a very good life.
Well, I don't have any personal connection to him, but I've known a lot of the properties that he's involved in, and I'm sure we'll get to some of the movies at some point that he was involved in. I'm sure he is going to be missed for the work that he has done. We give him a moment of silence here in recognition of his work. Thank you. All right, best funniest lines. This one's got a lot of them. And I don't know if I went with every one of them. We're probably going to pick a few different ones. I'll start off. Shrek looks at Farquaad's very large castle. Gee, you think he's compensating for something?
Yes. You know, Donkey, sometimes things are more than they appear.
That'll do, donkey. That'll do.
Ogres are like onions. They stink, Donkey. Yes, no. They make you cry? No. If you leave them out in the sun, they turn brown and start spouting little white hairs? No. Onions have layers. Ogres have layers.
Donkey, two things, okay? Shut up.
Donkey. And then one time I ate some rotten berries. Man, there were some strong gases seeping out of my butt that day.
Donkey, We can stay up late, swapping manly stories, and in the morning, I'm making waffles.
Shrek, listen, little donkey. Take a look at me. What am I? Really tall?
No, I'm an ogre. Lord Farquaad, some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
Shrek, I can see my father saying this. I like my privacy.
Donkey, wow, that was really scary. And if you don't mind me saying, if that don't work, your breath will certainly get the job done, because you definitely need some Tic Tacs or something, because your breath stinks.
Donkey, she called me a noble steed.
Donkey, whoa, look at that. Who'd want to live in a place like that? That would be my home. Oh, and it is lovely. You know, you're quite a decorator. It's amazing what you've done with such a modest budget. I like that boulder. That is such a nice boulder. You got any more?
Princess Fiona, bachelorette number 2 is Snow White. She may live with 7 men, but she ain't easy.
Oh, yeah. I hope this translates well and that it doesn't end up being shrill in the edit, so I might have to do this twice. But Lord Farquaad, run, run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man. You're a monster. I'm not the monster here, you are. You and the rest of that fairy tale trash poisoning my perfect world. Now tell me, where are the others? Eat me! Spits in Farquaad's face. I've tried to be fair to you creatures, but now my patience has reached its end. Tell me or I'll. No! Not the buttons! Not my gumdrop buttons! All right, then, who's hiding them? Okay, I'll tell you. Do you know the Muffin Man? The Muffin Man? The Muffin Man! Yes, I know the Muffin Man. Who lives on Drury Lane? Well, she's married to the Muffin Man. The Muffin Man? The Muffin Man! She's married to the Muffin Man. Fucking gets me every time.
Oh, let's not go any further than that.
No, that's about good. All right, let's go to the Stanley rubric. Legacy is up first. Do you want to go first or should I?
Go ahead.
So, at a time, I would say this was definitely a 5 for certain audiences. Again, I think that this was a big movie in the moment, but I do think it has waned a bit or lost some ground for other big animated features that have come out more recently for kids. I think this was somewhat of my generation's movie, or maybe even my sister's. So, in that sense, like there are a lot bigger movies. I think kids are more fascinated with some certain Marvel movies or Frozen, Moana at this point than they ever would be with Shrek. Not that parents haven't occasionally tried to introduce kids to this, but I just don't think it holds the same resonance. And so it's kind of a generation in a way. Even though I think a lot of people have probably seen this movie. So I would have to go with where it's currently at, and I think that's probably a 4. It just doesn't have the same appeal as it did initially on. I think within the industry, it didn't reinvent the wheel, but it did lay down two very big markers at the time. The first animated movie to win the best animated feature, which I tend to usually watch most of the animated features every year when we do our Oscars preview or predictions episode, but just on my own even before we did that for the show. And it was the second big animated movie by DreamWorks at that time, easily its most successful, and has since become the DreamWorks animation mascot because of how successful this movie was. I'm pretty sure, and I'd have to look this up, but Despicable Me and How to Train Your Dragon are both DreamWorks properties. We wouldn't have either of those franchises if not for this movie. And this kind of laid down a marker that Disney Pixar was not the only animation studios that were in Hollywood at this point. We now have a couple of other small independent studios. It's not nearly as wide as maybe it could have been, but the fact that we at least have these two major studios competing and putting out regularly animated features for kids, I think is somewhat of a big deal, even if it's not necessarily the biggest of deals. You still have at least one of these major tentpole movies built into these budgets of the studios from whatever's left of them on a yearly basis. So I will go with a 4 on that side as well. That takes me to an 8.
Okay, I had that it had a significant impact on the industry itself because I think it continued a legacy with Katzenberg making films, animated films that were both popular for children as well as for the adults. It was something that you could take your children to, and it wasn't you just sitting there bored out of your mind because this is only for them. There was certain aspects that were above them that you as an adult could enjoy. As far as the public, I mean, what did they do? Shrek 5, if I remember right.
I think there was only 4. I'm pretty sure there was only 4, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was a fifth.
Yeah, and I mean, basically, Eddie Murphy and Mike Myers, after they were done with the Shrek series, would never have to work again in their lives if they didn't want to.
They didn't really.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why Mike Myers did only one other like Austin Powers movie after this. It also had a little bit to do with the Love Guru, but still,
We won't discuss that one. I've only
yes, because
seen bits and pieces, but
it
oh
might
my
be the
god,
worst movie ever made.
it's got to be up there.
It's
So,
not just that it's bad; it's in bad taste, not funny, and offensive. But
other than that, it's good.
exactly.
It's at that point you become so big in Hollywood that you can just dictate to do something that you want to do, with regardless of how bad or tasteless it is.
So, what was your final score?
I actually had an 8.
Impact significance.
At the time, this was huge. I
Hmm.
mean, everybody was. It was the theater was full from what I can remember. Everybody wanted to take their kids. So from the public, it was a 5. And as far as the studios, I mean, this kind of set DreamWorks as being the alternative. It was questionable, and I remember reading in the old days, on that early 2000s, still having a full Sunday New York Times, a written, tangible newspaper, and sitting and laying on the floor at home reading the Times, reading the entertainment and movie section, and reading an article specifically discussing Katzenberg and whether he was going to destroy Disney's animation by creating something better with DreamWorks. It didn't ultimately prove to be the death knell for Disney, but it did, as you indicate, really kind of put them behind the 8 ball. They lost a ton of creativity and a real driving force. So I went with a 4.5 as far as the industry. So I went with a 9.5.
Well, and just to make a finer point on that, I think they credit Disney Animation coming back in the last 10 years or something to essentially working with Pixar, because if they had not or if they had not purchased Pixar at the time that they did, they would have been essentially out to lunch. They did not make the transition well from hand drawn to computer animated in the way that some of these other studios did. And DreamWorks and Pixar really led the revolution in animation to stuff that was much more producible at a faster and better clip. And that's why you can have 2 to 3 Pixar movies a year, or at least one Pixar movie and one Disney movie a year at this point. But it's also on the money of this. We said at the top that this was the fourth highest grossing movie of that year. I remember Shrek 2 set a ton of records for like the highest grossing sequel at the time. It was an enormous movie. The first 2 were just absolutely huge. You could not go to a lot of kids' birthday parties without this being on. You could not necessarily go to like youth groups without somebody talking about this. It was something that was so in the public conscience. the fact that Mike Myers got his own, excuse me, the title character Shrek got his own Hollywood Walk of Fame star, I think sets apart that this movie was significant for a lot of people for a long time. I think it's waned since, but at least in that initial period, you could say this was by far the biggest animated series of the time. Maybe, well, no, I would say it was probably bigger at the time than either Toy Story or Monsters Inc. So for me, the audience is five. For the industry, because of the amount of money that it was making, and because it signified to actors that you could make a ton of money in animation, I think that also boosted the credibility. So you could have somebody like Steve Carell leading a Despicable Me later on, or you could have, I guess Billy Crystal and John Goodman had already done Monsters Inc., and Tom Hanks and Tim Allen had done Toy Story, but you're starting to continue this line of bigger actors getting into movies and doing this sort of thing, and being the tent poles around which you would build some of your studio credibility per year and your dollars. So I'll go 4.5 on that one for a 9.5 overall. What was yours again?
9.
Okay. So that's a 9.25 between us. Novelty. Honestly, this is a mashup of a lot of things we already know. The hero's journey, the beast turned into Prince Charming, the amount of fairy tale references. I mean, realistically, they showed this to the lawyers at DreamWorks coming out ahead of time because they knew right off the bat that they were referencing a lot of Disney properties. When you talk about Snow White or Sleeping Beauty, or the fact that they basically ripped off the It's a Small World song for the Welcome to Do-Lot. It even has the same rhythmic beat and the same pace and tempo. So the fact that they're kind of going directly at Disney, being the anti fairy tale, and using all of these, I think with good story and good humor that was easily consumable and rewatchable, gives it credibility as somewhat novel. Is it completely new and fresh to itself? Not necessarily, but being somewhat counterculture and thumbing your nose at it, I think does give you some credibility there. The biggest thing to me is they took a swing on this movie and rewarded for it. Ants was not necessarily a like hugely popular movie. I remember it being up there, but like at the same time you were doing Ants, it was A Bug's Life. And I think A Bug's Life ended up being like the bigger movie at the time, but that was Pixar. And so, other than Disney, there weren't a lot of major studios doing animation. This was really them putting their flag down and going for it in a way that nobody else had been daring to do for a long time. For that, I give it a 7.
I went with an 8 for a lot of the same reasons you indicated. I mean, the reason it took some of the actions it did, it was almost like Katzenberg said, thumbs his nose and like, hey, I dare you, come after me. I'm gonna challenge Disney. I dare Michael Eisner. I dare the Disney Corporation to come after me because I will take you down. And they didn't want to take the challenge. So to that extent, there's a certain novelty. And when I started out and I said this is Prince Charming with ogres, it comes at it from a completely different angle, which is it would have been great as a fairy tale, that she kisses Shrek and he turns into a prince. No, it doesn't. It goes the other direction, which is the beautiful princess becomes an ogre. And so I think this had more significance than what we consider for the normal fairy tale. And I think that's why I went with an 8.
Classicness. You always lead off. Go ahead.
I know it's a fairy tale, and again, it's a situation. Two guys go to rescue a girl. Okay, it perpetuates a stereotype that's existed for I don't know the last 6,000 years.
I mean, it is borrowing the patriarchy tropes in order to highlight their unclassicness.
Yeah,
Ill classicness. I guess since we're inventing a new word, we can kind of workshop that, but still.
So I always go to start with a five. I know you look at it differently. I start with a five and go up or down. I didn't find anything other than that was outrageous, but it's basically retelling a story that the story is based on the situation of what history had been for the male female roles. So I went with an eight.
Okay. I would say that more than anything, if this was going to be deemed unclassic, ill classic, whatever, first and foremost, you have to look at the humor. I still find this an incredibly funny movie, even 20 years later on. And eventually that will age out. There are a lot of very, I guess, guy humor level jokes in here. There's an arrow in your butt. Okay. Haha. We make fart jokes. I mean, we repeated the line, yeah, it's funny, but there was a lot of serious gas seeping out of my butt that day. Just Eddie Murphy kind of riffing off of those things. But it does have other levels of humor. I mean, that gingerbread man scene works just so well, and it really doesn't have anything unclassic. So for me, since I'm the one doing the character or doing the grading here, I think the humor does add enough to give it an extra point up. And because I don't see anything necessarily detracting or bringing it back down, I will also give it an 8. Rewatchability, I had a 9.5. I think this is an incredibly easily rewatchable movie. It's funny, it's fast paced, it's, I think, less than 90 minutes long. It's very easy to get through this movie. I think it drags a little bit towards the end where they have to draw out the ending a little bit more because, of course, you've got to have where the ogre doesn't think he's good enough and somebody's got to kick him in the pants and, okay, well, go after the girl, make your feelings known, that sort of thing. But other than that, I think this is a very easily rewatchable movie. I could very much, if I ever actually was lucky enough to have children, see myself showing this to them or nieces and nephews and laughing along with them 10, 15, 20 years from now. This is something that will probably be one of those animated classics that you can easily show off because I think it will be somewhat aging well. And I don't think I'm going to have a problem with this at any age to rewatch it. So 9.5 for me.
I went at it a little differently than you because to me the humor, yeah, it's funny, but it's the type of humor where you find it funny if you kind of have an opportunity to distance yourself from it periodically so that the jokes actually have a bigger impact. So I went down a little bit further because I this is not a film I'm going to rewatch every year, and probably not every couple of years. It's probably a 3 or 5 year cycle, unless I have grandchildren. And again, that's going to be the humor of watching a film like this when you have grandchildren or other people's children's to show this. You're laughing not as necessarily as much of the film, but at their reaction to the film. So that way I went down to an 8 for rewatchability.
So that is an 8.75 between us as the average. For audience score, we had an 87 for Google users and we had a 90 for Rotten Tomato users. That averages out to an 8.85. So to recap, we had a 8 for legacy, 9.25 for impact significance, 7.5 for novelty, 8 for classicness, 8.75 for rewatchability, and 8.85 for audience score. That gives us a grand total of 50.35. And so that would make it currently in between Apocalypse Now and Taxi Driver on the list.
Yes, because when I think of Apocalypse Now, Taxi Driver, I also think of Shrek.
Oh, Donkey, don't step on that landmine.
You talking to me? You talking to me, donkey?
Okay, now, never mind. I was going to make some really bad jokes. I was just going to go into some really bad places and it just isn't worth it. All right, remaining questions. I didn't have any. I mean, realistically,
No.
I've seen at least Shrek 2. I think I might have seen Shrek 3 once somewhere, but I kind of aged out after that. I remember
Yeah,
seeing Shrek 2 on vacation in Dallas, Texas at the time, oddly enough. But I mean, either if you have any remaining questions, they're probably answered by the sequels. But I mean, this is supposed to be its own story and kind of wrap itself up. There
yeah,
isn't much as far as just storylines that don't come back together at some point. Even the gingerbread man gets his legs back.
true.
So, any remaining questions for you?
No, I do not have any.
All right. So, any remaining thoughts for the week?
No, I'm thinking of the films we have going into the end of this season and what we're talking about next season. Actually, you had picked so many of the films to end this season, and I have just a couple. I think I'm going to ask for a month where I pick 4 films that are offbeat, that are films that I enjoy, but are not necessarily well known or well thought of or whatever, and just kind of, we'll see.
I'm going to really enjoy next week when you actually have to sit down and watch The Matrix.
Yeah, I know.
The fact that you don't know in this day and age of conspiracy theories and whatnot what simulation theory and red pilling are, you're going to find yourself in a new world next week.
Yes, I know.
Well, this is my life. It always will be. There's nothing else. Just us and the microphones. And those wonderful people out there in the dark. All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close up. Next week, in anticipation of the new movie coming next month, as I just mentioned, we are covering the original The Matrix, starring Keanu Reeves, Carrie-Anne Moss, and Lawrence Fishburne. You won't want to miss that one, so please watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have, so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at greatestalltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Find us on Instagram at GModePodcast, or find us on Twitter at GModePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.